The knife scraped against my mother's china plate, and I felt it in my teeth. That sound always preceded something awful at these family dinners, like a warning bell I'd learned to recognize, but never learned to escape. I watched my brother Derek lean back in his chair with that self-satisfied posture he'd perfected over 29 years of being the golden child, and my stomach tightened into a familiar knot of dread. "So, Emma," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension wrapped in false concern, "still playing around with that little business idea of yours?" I focused on cutting my roasted chicken, keeping my movements steady, deliberate. I'd learned long ago that reacting only fed him. The table had gone quiet, that special kind of silence that meant everyone was waiting to see how badly I'd be humiliated this time. "Actually, I started, but he rolled right over me. Because Mom was telling me you've been at this for what, 5 years now? And you're still living in that studio apartment in the bad part of town." He shook his head with theatrical sympathy. "Don't you think it's time to accept that some people just aren't cut out for entrepreneurship?" My father made a non-committal sound that could have been agreement. My mother focused intently on her mashed potatoes. My sister-in-law, Rebecca, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. This was the family dance we'd perfected. Derek attacked, I endured, and everyone else pretended they didn't see it happening. But it hadn't always been this way. When we were kids, Derek had been my hero. 6 years older, impossibly cool, the brother who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework. Something shifted when I turned 13 and beat him at chess for the first time. I remembered the look on his face, surprise, then something darker that I didn't have words for back then. Now I knew it was threatened masculinity, fragile ego, the inability to share space with someone else's success. It got worse in high school when I got into MIT and he'd gone to state school. Worse still when I graduated summa cum laude, while he'd barely scraped by with a business degree that our parents had paid a fortune for. Every achievement of mine became a personal affront to him, and somehow, impossibly, I became the villain in our family story. "Derek," I said quietly, "I really don't want to do this tonight." "Do what?" "Have an honest conversation about your future? Someone has to care enough to tell you the truth, Emma. You're almost 30 years old. You should have a husband, a real career, stability. Instead, you're chasing some pipe dream that's never going to pan out." The husband comment was a particular cruelty. He knew, everyone at this table knew, that I'd been engaged 3 years ago to Michael, a man I'd loved desperately. But Derek had taken Michael out for drinks and spent the evening explaining how I was unstable, unrealistic, and going to drag down anyone foolish enough to tie themselves to my sinking ship. Michael broke up with me 2 weeks later, saying he needed someone more grounded. I didn't find out about Derek's intervention until a year later when Michael, drunk and guilty, sent me a confessional email. By then, the damage was irreversible. My trust was shattered. Not just in Michael but in my own family. What kind of brother actively sabotages his sister's happiness? "The tech industry is brutal," Derek continued, warming to his subject now. He loved an audience, and our parents were watching him with that familiar expression of pride mixed with concern. Concern for me, pride in him for being the realistic one. 90% of startups fail. And from what Mom tells me, you're barely scraping by. How much longer are you going to pretend? "I'm not pretending anything," I said, my voice tight. "Really? Because Dad was telling me you had to borrow money for your rent last year." My head snapped up. I stared at my father, who had the decency to look slightly ashamed. That money, $500 when my landlord had threatened eviction, had been a loan I'd paid back within 2 months. It had been during my darkest period, when I'd been working 3 jobs while building my company, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and ramen noodles, believing in something that everyone I loved told me was worthless. "I paid that back," I said. "With interest." "That's not the point," Derek said. "The point is you needed it in the first place. You're drowning, Emma. We can all see it. Why can't you?" What he couldn't see, what none of them could see, was that I'd been drowning because of them. Every family dinner was a fresh wound. Every phone call with my mother where she asked when I'd get a real job was another weight pulling me under. Every time Derek publicly humiliated me, Another part of my confidence eroded. But I'd kept swimming. Even when the water closed over my head, even when I couldn't see the surface, I'd kept fighting. Not for them. For myself. To prove that the voice inside me that said, "You can do this," was louder and more true than all their voices combined telling me I couldn't. "I worry about you," Derek said, and the worst part was that he almost sounded sincere. Almost. "We all do. Right, Mom?" My mother nodded, her face creased with worry. Genuine worry, I knew. She did love me. But she loved Derek more, had always loved him more, and would always choose his version of reality over mine. That was the cruelest part of all. Not that Derek was vicious, but that everyone let him be. That they turned his cruelty into concern, his sabotage into sibling advice, his pathological need to see me fail into caring about my future. I was done being the family scapegoat. Tonight, everything would change. What they didn't know, what I'd hidden from every single one of them with the discipline of a spy, was that their concern was 5 years too late and aimed at a version of me that no longer existed. That studio apartment Derek loved to mock? I'd moved out of it 18 months ago. Now I lived in a 3-bedroom penthouse in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the waterfront. I kept the old apartment's address on file with my parents because I needed the separation. I needed a wall between their judgment and my reality. The borrowed rent money? That had been 3 years ago during what I now called my dark period, the 6 months when I was working as a waitress during breakfast shifts, doing freelance coding in the afternoons, and building Meridian Technologies through the night. 18-hour days that blurred into each other. Surviving on coffee, ambition, and the burning need to prove everyone wrong. I remembered the exact moment my company became real. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, and I'd just finished the beta version of our logistics software. My eyes were burning from staring at code for 16 hours straight. My apartment was freezing because I'd kept the heat off to save money. I had $47 in my checking account and a mountain of credit card debt that kept me awake at night. I remembered the exact moment my company became real. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, and I'd just finished the beta version of our logistics software. My eyes were burning from staring at code for 16 hours straight. My apartment was freezing because I'd kept the heat off to save money. I had $47 in my checking account and a mountain of credit card debt that kept me awake at night. But the software worked. It was beautiful. Elegant. It solved a problem that billion-dollar companies were struggling with: how to optimize supply chain logistics in real time using predictive AI algorithms. I'd seen the gap in the market during my brief stint at a tech company after MIT, before they laid me off in a round of budget cuts that Derek had called a sign from the universe that you're not meant for this. I launched it on a Friday. By Monday, I had 50 companies requesting demos. By the end of the month, I had my first client, a mid-sized shipping company willing to take a chance on unknown software from an unknown CEO. They paid me $15,000 for a 6-month contract. I cried when the money hit my account, sat on my bathroom floor, and sobbed with relief and terror and vindication, all mixed together. Then I wiped my face, stood up, and got back to work. That first client led to 3 more. Those 3 led to 10. I hired my first employee, Jamie, a brilliant developer who believed in my vision enough to take a pay cut from his corporate job. Then 2 more. Then 5. I moved the operation out of my apartment and into a small office space that smelled like mildew and broken dreams, but it was ours. During all of this, I kept going to family dinners, kept enduring Derek's commentary, kept listening to my mother's worried phone calls about my future. I told them nothing. When they asked how my little project was going, I said fine and changed the subject. When Derek made jokes about my inevitable failure, I smiled tightly and let him think he was right. It was strategic silence. Every time I'd shared good news in the past, Derek had found a way to poison it. When I got into MIT, he told everyone I'd only gotten in because of affirmative action for women in tech, which wasn't even how that worked. When I landed my first job, he said the company was third-rate, and I was lucky they were desperate. When I won a coding competition with a $10,000 prize, he suggested I'd probably cheated. So I stopped sharing. I built my empire in the shadows while they all assumed I was failing in the light. The turning point came during year 2. A venture capital firm had heard about Meridian through industry connections. They wanted to meet. I remembered sitting in their glass and chrome conference room, 27 years old, wearing a suit I'd bought at a thrift store, pitching to 4 men in $1,000 watches who looked at me like I was their daughter playing dress-up. But then I showed them the numbers. The client retention rate, the revenue growth, the market projections. I watched their expressions shift from patronizing amusement to genuine interest. By the end of the meeting, they were leaning forward, asking questions, seeing what I'd seen all along, that this wasn't a little business idea. This was the future of logistics technology. They offered me $8 million for 20% of my company. I negotiated them up to $10 million for 18%. My lawyer, a woman I'd met through an entrepreneur networking group who worked on contingency because she believed in me, nearly fell out of her chair. The VCs looked impressed. One of them said, "You're tougher than you look." I smiled and thought about Derek, about every time he'd called me weak, unrealistic, destined to fail. And I signed a contract with a steady hand. That money changed everything. I hired a full development team, moved into a real office with a lobby and a receptionist, started landing major clients, Fortune 500 companies with massive supply chain operations. Within a year, we'd tripled our revenue. Within 2 years, we were approaching $50 million in annual revenue, and I was hiring our 200th employee. I should have been celebrating at every milestone. Instead, I was sitting through family dinners where Derek explained business concepts to me that I'd mastered in my MBA coursework, which I'd completed online during my failing years. Where my father asked if I'd considered going back to school for something more practical like teaching or nursing. Where my mother suggested I might be happier if I just settled down and started a family. The hardest part wasn't building the company. It was sitting at that dinner table, week after week, month after month, letting them believe I was exactly who they thought I was, a failure, a dreamer, a cautionary tale of ambition without talent. But I had a plan. I'd always had a plan. I was waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when Derek's arrogance would be at its peak, when his cruelty would be most public, when I could deliver the truth like a precision strike that would shatter everything he believed about himself and about me. I was waiting for tonight. 3 weeks ago, Forbes had published their 30 under 30 list. I'd made it. There was a photo shoot, an interview, a glossy 2-page spread about Meridian Technologies and its visionary young founder who's disrupting a $1 trillion industry. The article mentioned our recent Series B funding round, $47 million out of $400 million valuation. It mentioned our upcoming expansion into European markets. It quoted industry leaders calling me one of the most innovative minds in tech. My parents didn't read Forbes. Derek did, religiously, always hoping to network with the people featured in it. But he'd missed this issue, had been on vacation with Rebecca in the Bahamas, posting Instagram photos of himself on the beach with captions about work-life balance and knowing your worth. He'd come back yesterday. Today was Sunday dinner, and I'd worn my nicest dress, the one that cost $3,000 and looked like it came from Target, and come prepared for war. Now, sitting at this table, listening to Derek tell me I'd never succeed, I felt the weight of 3 years of secrets pressing against my chest. 3 years of victories celebrated alone. 3 years of problems solved, without family support. 3 years of becoming exactly who I'd always known I could be, while they remained convinced I was nothing. The folder in my bag contained printouts. The Forbes article, news coverage of our Series B round, client testimonials, revenue reports, everything that would prove, beyond any shadow of doubt, that I hadn't just succeeded, I'd exceeded every definition of success that existed. But more than that, I had screenshots. Derek didn't know I knew about the email he'd sent to my potential investors 2 years ago, warning them that I was emotionally unstable and a bad investment. The investor had forwarded it to me with a note. "Thought you should know someone's trying to sabotage you. We're investing anyway, because your product speaks for itself." I had the LinkedIn messages he'd sent to my employees, trying to poach them by telling them Meridian was going under and they should jump ship while they could. None of them had taken him up on it. Instead, they'd show me the messages and asked if I wanted them to report him for harassment. I had evidence of every act of sabotage, every cruel intervention, every deliberate attempt to destroy what I was building. And tonight, I wasn't just going to reveal my success. I was going to make sure everyone at this table understood exactly what Derek had done. Exactly what kind of person he really was. "You'll never succeed, Emma," Derek said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "And that's okay. Not everyone can be like me." I set down my wine glass and smiled. After 3 years of silence, I was finally ready to speak. "Actually, Derek," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "I need to tell everyone something." The table went silent. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My father looked up from his plate with that mixture of hope and dread that I'd seen so many times before. Hope that I was finally going to announce something normal like a job at a bank or an engagement. Dread that I was about to embarrass myself again. Derek leaned back in his chair, that insufferable smirk spreading wider.
"What?
You're finally giving up? Going to get a real job? I know a guy at my company who might be able to get you an entry-level position. The pay isn't great, but it's a start." The condescension in his voice was so thick, I could taste it. Entry-level. After everything I'd built. After all the nights I'd bled for my company, while he coasted through his mediocre middle management career. "I'm a CEO," I said quietly. The words landed like a grenade in the middle of the table. Derek's smirk froze. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's water glass stopped halfway to his lips. Rebecca looked up sharply, her eyes wide. "What?" my mother whispered. "I'm the CEO and founder of Meridian Technologies. We develop AI-powered logistics software for Fortune 500 companies. Last month, we closed a Series B funding round worth $47 million. We have 230 employees across 3 offices, one here, one in Austin, and one in Berlin. We're projected to hit $100 million in revenue by the end of the quarter." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Derek's face had gone from smug to pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. "You're lying," he said, but his voice cracked on the second word. I reached into my bag, the Prada bag I'd bought myself after our series had closed, though I'd removed the label so my mother wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions, and pulled out my phone. I opened it to the Forbes article I'd bookmarked. The one with my face on it, my title in bold letters. Emma Chen, 29, CEO of Meridian Technologies, disrupting a $1 trillion industry. I slid the phone across the table to my mother. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. I watched her eyes scan the screen, watched them go wider and wider as she read. She passed it to my father without a word. Derek snatched it from his hands before Dad could finish reading. I watched my brother's face as he stared at the screen, watched the color drain completely, watched his throat work as he swallowed hard. He started scrolling. Found the other articles. The TechCrunch piece about our funding round. The Wall Street Journal feature on emerging tech companies. The Bloomberg interview, where I discussed our expansion strategy. How he started then stopped. Started again. When did this? Remember 5 years ago? I kept my voice conversational, almost pleasant. When I told you about my idea for cloud-based predictive logistics software, you laughed. You said it was cute but useless. You told me I should leave the tech stuff to people who understand business. Derek's jaw clenched. Rebecca was staring at him with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I built it anyway," I continued. "In that studio apartment you love to mock. Working 18-hour days while you were posting on LinkedIn about your corporate journey and your leadership insights. Funny thing about those posts, Derek, I read them. You have 1,200 followers. Most of them are bots. Meanwhile, I have 62,000 followers and I've never posted once. They follow me because of what I've built." "Emma," my father said, his voice strange and hollow. "Why didn't you tell us?" I turned to look at him. Really look at him. At the man who had compared me to Derek at every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering for the past decade. Because every time I came to dinner, you let him tear me down. Every single time. Every achievement I tried to share, you dismissed it. When I got into MIT, you said I'd probably drop out. When I graduated summa cum laude, you said grades didn't matter in the real world. When I started my company, you asked when I was going to get serious about my life. My mother's eyes were filling with tears. Honey, we didn't mean. Yes, you did. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I was done softening my truth for their comfort. You meant every dismissive comment, every comparison to Derek. Every time you suggested I should be more realistic or practical. You meant all of it. So I stopped telling you anything. I stopped sharing my life with you. I built my success in silence because I knew that if I told you, you'd find a way to make it small. To make me small. Just like you always have. That's not fair, Derek said, but his voice had lost all its authority. He sounded like a child caught in a lie. Fair. I laughed, and it was a bitter sound. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you about fair, Derek. I pulled out my second phone, my work phone, the one with all my receipts, and opened my email. Found the message I'd saved for 3 years. March 15th, 2022. You sent an email to Riverside Ventures, one of the VCs I was pitching to. You told them I was emotionally unstable and a bad investment risk. You said I had a history of impulsive decisions and inability to handle pressure. You tried to sabotage my funding round. Derek's face went from pale to gray. I was trying to protect them from what? From me succeeding? From proving you wrong. I turned the phone so everyone could see the email. They invested anyway. $8 million. And you know what the managing partner told me? He said, anyone who inspires this much fear in their competitors must be doing something right. Rebecca had her hand over her mouth. My mother looked like she might be sick. But that wasn't enough for you, was it? I was on a roll now, years of suppressed rage flowing out like lava. You sent LinkedIn messages to my employees. Tried to poach them. Told them Meridian was going under, and they should jump ship. Want to know how many took you up on that offer? 0. Not a single one. Instead, they showed me your messages and asked if they should report you for harassment. I didn't, Derek stammered. Should I tell them about Michael? I asked softly. About how you took my fiancé out for drinks and spent 3 hours convincing him I was going to drag him down. About how he broke up with me 2 weeks later, and I spent a year thinking something was wrong with me. My mother gasped. Derek, you didn't. He needed to know what he was getting into. Derek's voice had risen, defensive and desperate. She was obsessed with this fantasy, and he deserved to know. He deserved to make his own choice. I slammed my hand on the table, and everyone jumped. You took that from him. From both of us. Because you couldn't stand the idea that your little sister might be happy. Might succeed. Might be better than you. I am successful. Derek shouted. I have a good job, a good salary. You make $85,000 a year. I said flatly. I know because you told Dad and Dad told Mom and Mom tried to use it as an example of what a real career looks like. You've been in the same position for 6 years. No promotions. No advancement. You're stuck, Derek. And instead of dealing with your own stagnation, you've spent years trying to ensure I'd be stuck too. The silence that followed was suffocating. Derek was staring at his plate, his hands clenched into fists. Rebecca had moved her chair slightly away from him, and I noticed she was looking at him like she'd never really seen him before. There's more, I said and pulled out the folder from my bag. This is a printout of our Q3 financial report. Revenue of $78 million. Profit margin of 32%. Client retention rate of 97%. We're not just successful, Derek. We're dominating our market segment. I slid the papers across the table. My father picked them up with shaking hands. This, I pulled out another document, is a letter of intent from Amazon. They want to acquire Meridian. The offer is $520 million. My ownership stake is 62%. Do the math. My mother made a choking sound. My father's face had gone completely white. $322 million, I said. That's what I'd walk away with after taxes if I accepted. I'm 30 years old, and I've built something worth $500 million. So when you say I'll never succeed, Derek, what exactly do you mean? Derek looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, complete and utter defeat. His smugness had evaporated. His condescension had crumbled. He looked small and mean and pathetic, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just emptiness where family love should have been. Are you going to accept? My father asked quietly. The Amazon offer? I don't know, I said honestly. I'm meeting with my board next week to discuss it. Part of me wants to keep building. We're doing important work. But another part of me, I paused, looking around the table at my family. Another part of me wants to take the money and disappear. Start over somewhere none of you can find me. Build a life with people who actually believe in me. Emma, that's not fair, my mother said, tears streaming down her face now. We love you. We've always loved you. Love isn't enough, Mom. You've loved me while enabling Derek to destroy me. You've loved me while questioning every choice I made. You've loved me while making it clear I'd never be good enough. That's not the kind of love I need. I'm sorry, Derek said suddenly. His voice was barely audible. I'm so sorry, Emma. I didn't realize, I knew I was hard on you, but I thought I was helping. I thought. You thought you were better than me, I said simply. You needed to believe you were better than me. Because if your little sister could succeed where you'd stagnated, what did that say about you? He flinched like I'd slapped him. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and cold. I'm going to leave this dinner. I'm going to go home to my penthouse that you don't know about. Tomorrow, I'm going to go to my office where 230 people rely on me to make good decisions. I'm going to keep building my company, whether I sell it or not. And I'm going to do all of this without you. Any of you. You can't just cut us out of your life, my father said, his voice breaking. Watch me. I stood up, gathered my phones and my folder. You cut me out first. Years ago. You just didn't notice because I was too busy surviving your rejection to make a scene about it. What do you want from us? My mother asked desperately. An apology? Money? What can we do to fix this? I looked at her, at this woman who had given birth to me, raised me, and then spent decades choosing her son over her daughter. Choosing comfort over confrontation. Choosing Derek's ego over my heart. I want you to understand what you've done, I said quietly. I want you to sit with the knowledge that you had a daughter who was building something extraordinary, and instead of supporting her, you tried to crush her. I want Derek to understand that his cruelty didn't make him strong, it made him weak. And I want all of you to know that I succeeded not because of this family, but despite it. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother sobbing, my father calling my name, Rebecca saying something to Derek in a harsh whisper. But it was Derek's voice that stopped me at the doorway. I got fired, he said. I turned around. He was staring at his hands, his shoulders hunched. What? Last month. I got fired. They said I wasn't meeting performance metrics. They said my management style was toxic and several employees had complained about me. I haven't told anyone. I've been pretending to go to work every day, sitting in coffee shops applying for jobs. I haven't gotten a single call back. The table was frozen. Rebecca's face had gone pale. I saw your Forbes article 3 days ago, Derek continued, his voice hollow. I saw everything you'd built. Everything I'd said you couldn't do. And I realized that while I was busy trying to destroy you, I destroyed myself instead. The cruelty I showed you? I showed it to everyone. My team. My colleagues. And it finally caught up with me. He looked up at me, and his eyes were red. You want to know why I did it? Why I spent years tearing you down? Because you were always smarter than me. More talented. More driven. And I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand being the older brother who got surpassed. So I tried to make you small enough that I could still feel big. And now I have nothing. No job. Probably no marriage. He glanced at Rebecca, who was staring at him with horror and disgust. And definitely no sister. The confession should have felt like victory. It should have been everything I'd wanted to hear. But instead, I just felt tired. "You're right," I said. "You have no sister. Not anymore." I walked out of my parents' house and into the cool evening air. My car was parked at the curb, a Tesla Model S that I'd paid cash for, that none of them had ever seen. I got in, closed the door, and sat in the silence for a long moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Jamie, my first employee and now my CTO. Board meeting moved to tomorrow at 2 p.m. Amazon increased their offer to $580 million. Your call, boss. I stared at the number. $580 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of as a little girl playing chess with her brother, back when I still thought he hung the moon. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. "Emma, it's Rebecca. Can we talk? There are things about Derek you should know. Things I just found out. I'm so sorry for not seeing it sooner." Then my mother. "Please come back. We can fix this. We're family." Then my father. "I understand if you need space. But please don't disappear. You're my daughter, and I love you, even if I've done a terrible job of showing it." Nothing from Derek. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, watching my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. I didn't know if I'd ever go back. I didn't know if I'd accept Amazon's offer or keep building. I didn't know if I'd eventually forgive my family or if this break would be permanent. But I knew one thing. I was done making myself small for anyone. I was done apologizing for my success. I was done carrying the weight of their expectations and their doubts. I was Emma Chun, CEO of Meridian Technologies. I was a woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had survived betrayal and sabotage and emerged stronger. I was worth $359 million if I took the deal, and I was worth infinitely more than that in ways that couldn't be measured in money. The girl who had sat at that dinner table for years, absorbing abuse and diminishment, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her value, who had proven, beyond any doubt, that she was exactly as capable as she'd always believed. And that woman? She was just getting started. 3 weeks later, I accepted Amazon's offer. Not because I needed the money, but because I was ready for the next chapter. I used $50 million to start a venture capital firm focused on funding women entrepreneurs who'd been told they'd never succeed. I bought my mother and father a small condo in Florida, far away from me, and told them they could retire. They accepted gratefully, though we still barely spoke. Rebecca divorced Derek. She called me once, crying, telling me she'd found evidence that he'd been doing to her what he'd done to me, systematically undermining her confidence, sabotaging her friendships, controlling her life. She thanked me for showing her the truth, even though it shattered her world. We met for coffee sometimes now. She was rebuilding herself, just like I had. Derek disappeared. I heard through the family grapevine that he'd moved across the country, was working in sales at some small company, had stopped using social media entirely. Part of me wondered if he'd ever truly understood what he'd done. Another part of me didn't care anymore. Because here's what I learned. Revenge isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. It's about building a life so powerful, so undeniable, that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. It's about proving to yourself that you were right all along. I was right. I always had been. And now the whole world knew it. The end. Retry. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.